Hello everybody, and thank you for joining me for today's video. I apologize for the late video today. I am quite busy on Wednesdays. I have class pretty much all day long, and I just got done eating dinner. So anyway, again, I apologize for the video coming out so late, but either way, thank you for joining me, and I'm happy that you are joining me because we have a lot to talk about here, including the system that is now getting ready to impact us going into tomorrow with severe weather, winter weather, and a lot of rain in between those two places. And then after that, we're going to talk about the long-range pattern, which we're starting to see signs of potentially this very zonal Pacific flow we've been dealing with breaking down going into the end of January. And we'll look at that, and we'll look at the different model discrepancies and see just who may finally get into a different pattern as we get into the end of the month. But if you haven't already, I'd love for you to subscribe. We're doing some great things on this channel. We've grown a lot over the past couple weeks, and we plan to keep that up going into the next couple of weeks. So got big goals and big ambitions here. And if you like the video, go ahead and like it and tell me where you are watching from. It makes it easier for me to do these videos knowing where my viewers are watching from, so I can go a little bit more in depth with your localized places. All right, so let's go ahead and get right into it here. Looking at satellite imagery, you can see this is our storm here getting going here into the plains this evening, and that will begin to work its way through the Mississippi River Valley and into the east going into tomorrow. And with that, we'll deal with that severe weather threat here into the southeast, and then those winter storm conditions here into northern New England. So again, a lot going on here. And then for our folks out west, again, dealing with that continual atmospheric river. But it looks like that pattern breakdown is in sight, and we will touch on that for everyone here throughout the lower 48. Looking at our hazards map, a lot more going on today than there was yesterday for sure. As you can tell, we've got these wildfire problems or red flag warnings out into parts of Texas, including wind advisories. So with that very dry air and those strong winds from this low pressure forming, could be dealing with the potential for wildfires if anything can get going. So make sure you're being careful out that way. And even wind advisories here into Alabama as that low pressure is going to begin to move on through. The conditions could definitely get to that wind advisory criteria. Other than that, got that winter weather watches and warnings up here for our folks in northern New England. Purple are the winter weather advisories. The blue are winter storm warnings. So find your county and you can tell what you are dealing with there. All right, so let's go ahead and time this out for us, and then we'll go in depth looking at individual areas and what I think they will see with this storm system. So bringing this ahead into time, we'll start with our GFS, then look at our Euro, and then go more in depth with our mesoscale models. Anyway, though, GFS here, as we get into tomorrow afternoon, you see that line of strong storms here setting up into the south. And then you also get that snow to begin here into New England. As we go further into the storm, that snow line will begin to push further north before most of us in New England switch over to all rain at some point. Although I think maybe the extreme northern bits of Maine can stay snow throughout this entire event, but we'll go ahead and look at that now. As we get into tomorrow evening here, you see that heavier precipitation moves into the northeast, and you have that snow line mainly confined here to most of the northern half of Maine as we get into the overnight tomorrow. Also, we get that line of storms to finally begin to move off the coast tomorrow, so hopefully we should begin to clear out into the southeast, and we'll have to see just how strong those storms get tomorrow. But on the back end of this, maybe some snow showers here on the western side of this low. Wouldn't be surprised for places in Ohio to potentially see, some light snow on the back end of this. But the people who will really get it good on the back end of this, are those of us who are going to get that northwest flow here into the Smoky Mountains, into the mountains of West Virginia, getting really probably the best northwest flow event we've had so far this winter. So for ski country there and all of you folks that live out there, you really look like you're going to kind of luck out with this system, while most of us are dealing with just rain or even severe weather. But as we begin to push this ahead into time, as you can see, we're getting into Friday morning and afternoon here, still dealing with that heavy onshore flow here into portions of New England, but clearing out into the mid-Atlantic other than that back-end northwest flow here into the mountains. Before eventually, as the system finally pulls out going into our Friday night and Saturday, just left with still some northwest flow lingering, and some back-end snow showers here into northern New England. And then we will all have a nice start to the weekend going into Saturday and a clear Sunday as well, before we prepare for our next system that will come through going into the beginning of next week. But we'll save that topic for another day. Looking at our Euro model here, again, very similar scenario here. Severe storms likely to break out here into the south tomorrow. From Georgia up through the Carolinas, I think, have the best shot at seeing that severe weather, but we will take a look at that next. And then, as we go into Thursday night, that snow breaking out here into the same places we've been talking about here into New England. Again, a very similar picture here on the Euro. And once again, that northwest flow kicks in here as the system pulls out going into Friday and Friday night, and that will linger likely through Saturday before we all clear out going into the latter half of the weekend, before next week, once again, we get that next system to begin to move in for a lot of us. Okay, so looking at the severe weather threat here, areas in this yellow color here indicate a slight risk of severe storms tomorrow. So this is a level 2 out of 5, so nothing off the chart, but definitely something you want to keep your eye on this time of year. A lot of the time we're not expecting severe weather in January, but tomorrow is one of those days that we will likely be dealing with it. And we'll take a look at those ingredients, but from Atlanta, Georgia, Birmingham, up to Greenville, Spartanburg, South Carolina, and then back over towards the Charlotte and Columbia metro area, I think are going to get pretty good storms out of this, and even up towards Nashville and into Kentucky with that marginal risk still dealing with that threat of severe storms. So let's break this down. Looking at our wind threat, pretty much follows the outline of the map you just saw. Yellow areas having a higher chance of seeing damaging winds, although the green areas still in play for that chance. This map is the chance of tornadoes. So this is kind of the lowest level it can get in terms of there actually being a threat. But you do have to realize going from 0% to 2% is quite an increase nonetheless. So again, looking at the map here, Nashville, Atlanta, Greenville, Spartanburg, Columbia, Charlotte, all these places at risk for potentially an isolated spin-up tornado. And we will take a look at those chances now into our next map. So timing this out here for the southeast tomorrow, pretty clear until we get to about sunrise tomorrow. And going into the afternoon, we'll get this line of showers and storms to form back into Alabama, which will have that chance of damaging winds and even possibly a spin-up tornado. But what I have my eyes on personally is I want you to watch this kind of cluster of storms in front of that line as we move this ahead into time. Going into tomorrow afternoon, really some discrete cells here popping up into the Carolinas and Georgia. And what that tells me is these storms will likely have more of a tornado threat than this cluster of storms further back. So could be dealing with a bit of a 1-2 punch tomorrow in areas. I definitely wouldn't be surprised to see a tornado warning or two get issued if we can get these cells to fire ahead of that line tomorrow. And a lot of the times here into the foothills of the Carolinas, you get kind of an increased tornado threat as these storms kind of move up against the mountains and the escarpment here. A lot of the times they begin to spin a little bit easier and kind of get some help from the terrain to spin. So I've got my eyes here tomorrow on the I-85 corridor here into upstate South Carolina through Charlotte, and I'll likely be storm chasing tomorrow if we can get these cells to pop up. So make sure you're keeping an eye out for that. I'll keep you updated on the channel throughout the day with videos if I do end up chasing. But it all depends on if we get these storms to form in front. But either way, still that threat of damaging winds here with that back-end line. So this is tomorrow afternoon. That line will likely be moving through Atlanta. And then as we get towards sunset, moving through the Greenville, Spartanburg area, and then eventually into Columbia, Charlotte. And then as we get towards midnight, finally moving off the coast with a lot less of a severe threat going into the Charleston, South Carolina area. And we'll clear out and have quite a nice Friday and weekend here throughout the southeast. Looking at some of those ingredients here, this is our instability map. This is really a classic kind of southeast low cape, high shear scenario. So we don't have that much instability to work with tomorrow, but what we do have is wind shear. So this is our instability map. As you can tell, nothing off the charts here, but nonetheless enough to get the job done. And then that will diminish as we get into the overnight hours through the Carolinas. But once you look at the wind shear here, you see as we get into tomorrow afternoon, we get these really bright reds in here indicating very strong jet stream, which will help these storms spin. And then as this gets into the Carolinas, look at this, even some of these yellow colors mixing in. I realize you can't see that very well, sorry. But these yellow colors mixing in here. So that, again, that's why I would really be careful here along the I-85 corridor throughout the Carolinas and Georgia. I think has the highest chance of seeing some of those spin-up tornadoes. But nonetheless, everyone in that risk should stay careful and informed throughout the day tomorrow. Okay, so go ahead and timing this out for the Mid-Atlantic. Now, Mid-Atlantic is kind of sandwiched in between these two threats of severe weather as well as winter weather. So likely just a rain for most of us in the Mid-Atlantic, except for those of us in the mountains who will get a very healthy dosing of northwest flow out of this system. But moving us ahead into time, some showers moving through into the overnight tonight. But for sunrise tomorrow, again, some showers scattered here throughout the Mid-Atlantic. But we'll get ready for that batch of rain to move through going into tomorrow afternoon. So as we move this ahead of time into tomorrow afternoon, again, that severe weather threat extending all the way up through Tennessee and Kentucky. So be careful in those areas as well as the areas we discussed earlier. But as this low pressure finally begins to move through here, that rain will begin to pick up through the Mid-Atlantic. I think especially going into later afternoon tomorrow and into tomorrow evening. Here into a place like DC, likely around sunset tomorrow, getting in on some of that heavier rain before this rain kind of overtakes most of the Mid-Atlantic during the overnight tomorrow before clearing out going into Friday afternoon. But as that clearing out begins, you see we get this northwest flow beginning to kick in into the mountains. So it looks a bit scattered here on this model, but I would expect more widespread northwest flow throughout the mountains here, likely a pretty steady snow as well, and we'll take a look at those totals here in a second. Looking at the northeast now, timing this out, again, tomorrow, get some snow to move in here, nothing crazy, but a lot of areas could start to snow tomorrow, especially the further north you go into New England, before eventually that heavier precipitation moves in during your Thursday overnight, and that's whenever we'll get that heavier snow to work in here into sections of Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont, before eventually changing over to rain for most of us into New Hampshire and Vermont. But I think that snow tries to hang on through, the northern half of Maine, although, again, most of us will switch over to rain at some point. Before that finally will begin to clear out after we get into Friday evening, but a lot nicer for most of us during the day Friday here throughout the Mid-Atlantic, and some back-end snow showers to worry about as well there coming off of the lakes. So looking at our winter storm impacts here for New England, this is a map I like a lot, and I haven't showed it yet in any of my previous videos, so this will be a nice bit of change, I guess. But anyway, the areas, once you start getting into these oranges, that's whenever you really begin to run into problems. That's the moderate risk of seeing those severe impacts. So again, the very northern tip of Maine, the most likely to see that, as well as some of the higher elevations here, potentially into New Hampshire, upstate New York, but not a very wide area here that will see those severe impacts out of the storm. Okay, so looking at snowfall totals here, we will look at the Smokies and up into the mountains of West Virginia before eventually turning our focus up towards New England. So overall, this has been trending better for a lot of us here into the mountains. Yesterday I said into the North Carolina mountains, maybe 1 to 3 inches. I think the highest terrains here into the North Carolina mountains could see maybe 6 to 12 inches at the very peaks of those mountains. But overall, I think 3 to 5 is a safe bet in those areas that usually get the northwest flow through here. Same story here for West Virginia, so don't be surprised to see that. Maybe a place like Asheville even seeing some flakes fly. I wouldn't expect an insane amount of accumulations in a place like Asheville, but nonetheless could see some of that snow flying. As for the Northeast, again, most of those heavy totals will be confined up here into northern Maine, but a lot of us in New England will see snow at some point, although in these areas a lot of that snow will get overtaken by rain and will kind of become a slushy mess. Unfortunately for us along the I-95, it doesn't look like much. Again, we'll check maybe Saturday afternoon, seeing some light snow showers over Cape Cod, but nothing too intense to worry about there with that. Other than that, though, most of us are going to get rain here in the east. That is another big story here. So, a soggy into the week for just about everyone in the east, especially here where that low tracks right over the Ohio River Valley. We'll see plenty of that rain. And then those of us that get that line of storms to move through tomorrow into the southeast as well, getting a lot of rain. So make sure you got your umbrella handy as this moves through. Okay, switching focus now to the long range pattern. We'll take a look as we go into the end of the month and where I think the pattern will finally begin to change up, and a lot of us could change to a bit of a better pattern for the chance of cooler, snowier weather here in the lower 48. So again, I want you to watch these really dark, sorry, I don't know how to draw apparently, these really dark kind of bluish colors, and watch where they track, and then you'll eventually see as we get into later on, you'll see these blue colors stop coming off the coast of California, and I'll talk about why that is important. So going into this week, you see that big blue blob here into the east. That's that storm that we're worrying about right now. And then as that moves out, going into early next week, we'll probably get another storm to move through as you see some of those blues moving through the central U.S. and kind of fading as they get into the east. Still a storm impact there. And then as we get later into next week, still dealing with those blues coming in off the Pacific. But once we get towards, not this weekend, but the next weekend, you see some of these reds building in here over the Pacific, signaling that flow of warm Pacific air will likely get cut off a bit. So that's a good sign for us in the east to at least bring closer to average temperatures going long range. And then as we go even longer out here, this is the GFS, and we'll look at the Euro as well. You see ridging out west, troughing right through the central of the country, and then ridging out east. So this would signal colder temperatures throughout the center of the country, although whenever you're looking at this kind of range, you don't want to put specific locations under that threat. Just know that I think someone here in the lower 48 will get a pretty good round of cold air once we get around the 2-week time frame going towards the end of January. So looking at the same thing with our Euro model here, a bit different, but still some similarities here than the GFS, or as the GFS, sorry. Again, once we go through the next week, you see these blues continuing to roll in off the Pacific into the lower 48. But once we get into, again, about that 10-day time period, you see these reds building off the coast, and then also reds off really both coasts. So what that does here is it brings that blue into the center of the country and a bit more east here on our Euro ensembles. But either way, still a general same picture, ridging, troughing, ridging, and what that could signal is cooler temperatures here into the middle and eastern half of the country. So the biggest thing that we really want to do here is we want a similar scenario to what the GFS shows here, because as you can see, those blues extend all the way down from the Arctic. So what that does is that helps to give a clear path for that cold air to continue to funnel down from the north. Here on the Euro, although we have the blues a bit further to the east, which is nice, you really want to get a clear connection here with the Arctic. So you're going to want to kind of get rid of some of this ridging here in the middle, excuse me, and just keep ridging out west and then ridging right off the coast here to help get those chances of snow back to the east. Anyway, though, with all that being said, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you all tomorrow.